General Hospital teasers for the week of August 25th to 29th promise some explosive scenes, including Stella Henry's arrest, Ava Jerome knocking out Rick Lansing cold, and Rocco Falconeri and Danny Morgan discovering a supposedly unresponsive body. The ABC soap recently revealed its weekly preview for the week of August 25th, and fans should prepare for some amazing drama over the next 5 days. The promotion begins strong, with the 2 agents from the New York State Office of Fraud returning to the hospital. With Curtis Ashford by her side near the nurse's station, one of the agents comes and says, "Stella Henry, you are under arrest." Stella appears surprised and scared. As the GH teaser progresses, a hot scene is seen at Alexis Davis's house, but she is not present. With that stated, in an unusual twist, Rick and Ava are having a fight in the presence of Christina Corinthos Davis. Ava is extremely enraged as she screams at Rick, "You betrayed me." While Rick answers, "Nah, you betrayed me first, dear." As Rick turns around, Ava, enraged, takes a piece of home decor, a silver ball on Alexis's table, and smacks Rick on the back of the head. He immediately collapses to the ground, leaving a crimson, bloody mark on the back of his head. Christina looks at Ava, absolutely speechless. The scene immediately cuts to a shot of Danny and Rocco at the docks, gazing out over the lake. The youths appear to be taking a break from their work at the Metro Court pool, as Danny squints and informs his brother from a different mother, "I believe that's a body." Immediately following Danny's comment, a montage of clips appears on the screen, one by one, with powerful violin music playing in the background. The first image shows Nina Reeves turning her head, irritated, followed by Alexis, who appears caught off surprise. Jocelyn Jacks appears to be hunched down somewhere at the Five Poppies Resort, terrified, and the final scene shows Portia Robinson tossing something in her office as she has yet another meltdown, most likely caused by Drew Kane. General Hospital spoilers indicate that the final week of August will be unforgettable. Nevertheless, the real questions here are who is the body in the lake that Danny discovers, and will Rick be okay? General Hospital teasers indicate that a preview clip has been released for the week of August 25th, 2025. It depicts Rocco Falconeri and Danny Morgan making a terrible find. Ava Jerome and Christina Corinthos Davis are in an unusual scenario together. In addition, Stella Henry has been arrested. Continue reading, and let's discuss what's coming up on the ABC soap drama. Ava Jerome's killer move. Let us start with Ava and Christina. They're conversing with Rick Lansing. Rick and Ava seem to face Christina. Then the betrayals are revealed. First, Ava becomes distraught about Rick's betrayal. However, the lawyer claims she betrayed him first. Then Ava reaches for a spherical decorative piece. Then she hits him over the head with it. Christina Corinthos Davis packed. Christina looks around in complete disbelief. This will push Ava and Christina to form a pact. It could also force Ava to discontinue her blackmail against Alexis Davis. Of course, these two will have a lot to work out. Christina and Ava have a long and volatile history. Adolescents' terrible discovery. General Hospital spoilers for the week of August 25th hint that the preview clip includes some adolescents making a terrible discovery. Danny and Rocco are out at night when one of them inquires whether that is a body. Could this be Rick's body or someone else's? Stella Henry's arrest. There is also Stella, who is in the hospital alongside Curtis Ashford. The fraud investigators claim that Stella is being arrested. So, of course, Curtis will go on the offensive. I believe it is a good idea for him to forge an alliance with Martin Gray. Martin may not be well known, but he was the closest person to Drew Kane's plans. Martin could possibly provide insight into Drew's thinking. The discovery of a body in Port Charles has elicited shocking reactions. Nina Reeves and Alexis are there, looking astonished. The closing scene has Portia Robinson flinging things around in her office. That lady takes her wrath out on her medical office. Which narrative are you most looking forward to witnessing in the week of August 25th, 2025? Share your opinions in the comments area below. Remember to keep watching ABC soap operas to see what happens next. She rubbed her hands on her pants, the rough fabric rubbing against her wounded knuckles. The alley was quiet save for the rain and the distant sound of cars on the main road. Ava looked around, half expecting to see someone emerge from the shadows, but the night was empty. She knelt alongside Rick and checked his pulse. It was steady, yet his breathing was shallow. He will wake up shortly and come for her. Rick was not the sort to let something like this go. He'd always been vengeful, since they were youngsters scrapping in the same impoverished area. Back then, it was only playground fights, but now? Now things were different. Rick had contacts, money, and a reputation for resolving difficulties. Ava was not naive, she knew that knocking him out wouldn't fix anything. It simply made matters worse. She stood, her boots splashing in a puddle, and backed away. Her thoughts raced. She could leave town tonight, but that would mean giving up everything she'd established here, the bar job, the tiny apartment she could barely afford, and the fragile feeling of security she clung to in the midst of chaos. No, running was not an option. Not yet. She needed to think about her next move before Rick awoke and began making calls. Ava tightened her jacket around her, the damp fabric clinging to her skin, and slid out of the alley, her footsteps echoing through the darkness. Across town, Rocco and Danny trudged through the woods, their flashlights casting feeble beams through the thick fog. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and wet earth, and the ground sucked at their feet with each stride. They weren't allowed to be out here this late, especially in Blackthorn Forest, where the locals claimed the trees whispered secrets if you listened too long. But Rocco had received a tip, a cryptic letter scrawled on a napkin and pushed under his door: check the ravine. You'll find what you're looking for. He hadn't spoken much to Danny, just enough to entice him to follow along. Danny was unquestionably loyal and did not ask any questions. He simply grabbed his coat and followed. Rocco's flashlight flickered as they approached the brink of the ravine, a precipitous drop into darkness. The beam caught something below, a gleam of metal, perhaps, or the pallid shape of something strange against the soil. Do you see that? Rocco whispered, his voice low, as if he was frightened of rousing anything. Danny squinted, leaning forward, and caught his breath when he realized what they were looking at. It was not metal. A pale, lifeless hand emerged from a mound of leaves and muck. The two men exchanged a glance that indicated they both realized this was more than they had anticipated. Danny followed closely behind Rocco as he struggled down the slope, his boots slipping on the damp earth. The body was half buried, as if someone attempted to hide it but gave up halfway. The face was unfamiliar, bloated and discolored from days spent outside, but the clothes, a leather jacket and tattered jeans, looked familiar. Too familiar. Your ex was about to expose us all, Alexis. I did what I had to. But mark my words, if the police come knocking, if I end up in a cell, Christina's role in that crash becomes public knowledge. And your little financial indiscretions? They'll bury you right alongside me. The threat hung in the air, a fatal promise that bound them in a web of mutual destruction. Anna Devane, of the Port Charles Police Department, paced her office like a caged lioness. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, irritating her strained nerves. Jocelyn Jacks, Carly's daughter and a young woman Anna had grown to consider almost her own, was in danger. The surgery at the Five Poppies Resort had gone wrong, and Anna's intuition told her it was time to pull the plug. But Jack Brennan, the mysterious WSB agent with the beguiling smile and hidden ambitions, was dragging his feet. Anna stormed inside Brennan's makeshift command center, a chamber in the back of the PCPD packed with monitors and encrypted data. "Brennan, this has to stop," she exclaimed, her British accent cut with intensity. Brennan looked up from his desk, his demeanor a mask of studied serenity. "Jocelyn's life is on the line. Abort the operation and bring her home, now." But there was a spark in his eyes, indicating the conflict beneath. Anna, it's not that simple. The intel we're gathering could take down Sidwell's entire network. Jocelyn knew the risks when she volunteered. Volunteered? Anna spat, slapping her hand on the desk. She's barely out of her teens, Brennan. This isn't a game. If something happens to her... Her voice trembled, and the meltdown grew like a storm. Anna had lost too much, Robin to the dangers of life, and her own peace to never-ending conflicts. Protecting Jocelyn was more than simply a duty, it was also personal. Tears welled in her eyes, which was unusual for the stoic commissioner, but the pressure was too great. Damn it, Jack! If you don't call it off, I'll do it myself. And if Jocelyn doesn't come back in one piece, I'll make sure you pay for it. Brennan was standing with a stiff neck. He had his own warnings to deliver, but Anna's desire made him reconsider. Earlier that day, he confronted Colette Moreau, a subordinate whose loyalty he was beginning to question. If I ever have to tell you again, he had warned her in a cold voice, it'll be the last thing you hear. Colette had gone too far, possibly informing Pascal about the WSB's infiltration intentions. Brennan could not afford betrayal, especially now. But Anna's plea broke through his willpower. All right, he said finally. I'll issue the abort order. But if Sidwell slips away because of this... He won't, Anna murmured, wiping her eyes. We'll get him another way. Just get Jocelyn safe. Unbeknownst to them, at the opulent yet menacing Five Poppies resort on the outskirts of town, Jocelyn Jacks and her partner Vaughn were already in chains, figuratively and literally. Jen Sidwell's resort, which served as a front for his illegal activities, had become a trap. Armed guards assaulted them in the foyer and dragged them to a hidden underground chamber. Jocelyn's heart beat as she tested the ropes that held her wrists. This wasn't part of the plan, she whispered to Vaughn, who had a new bruise on his cheek. Vaughn grunted. Tell me about it. Sidwell must have heard about the operation. We need to find a way out before... The door flung open, and Jen Sidwell entered, his slick exterior concealing the brutality in his gaze. He smiled cruelly as he stood surrounded by henchmen. Ah, the intruders. You thought you could spy on me? Foolish. Back in Port Charles, Lucy Coe sat in a dimly lit cafe, nursing a cold coffee. Maxie Jones, her colleague and friend at Deception, was in a coma as a result of what doctors described as a mystery poisoning. Lucy had confided in Sidwell earlier, hoping to find consolation in his assurances. We'll find a solution, he murmured, placing his hand on hers. But now doubts have crept in. Sidwell's business practices appeared sketchy. Could he be involved? Lucy shook her head and dismissed the thought. No, he was assisting her with the pandemonium at work. However, as she peered into her cup, a nagging notion developed. Cody Bell found himself unburdening Dante Falconeri on the terrace of the Quartermain home, overlooking the grounds. The evening air carried the perfume of roses, a dramatic contrast to Cody's grief. It's all messed up, man, Cody said, running his hand through his hair. Christina paid me to seduce Ava away from Rick, thinking it would help with whatever family drama they're going through. Dante cocked an eyebrow, resting against the railing. And Molly? What's she got to do with this? Cody groaned, his affections for Molly Lansing Davis coming to the surface. She was intelligent, strong, and everything he admired. But now, after telling her the truth, he thought he had lost her forever. I care about her, Dante. More than I should. But she knows everything now, the seduction plot, the lies. I blew it. Dante clasped him on the shoulder. Love's complicated in this town. Give her time. But if Ava's involved, watch her back. That woman's a viper. Molly, meantime, was at the hospital, keeping her Uncle Michael Corinthos updated on the latest. The clean hallways reverberated with beeps and muttering, adding to her nervousness. "Cody told me everything," she remarked quietly. "About Christina hiring him to go after Ava. But that's not what worries me most. Mom, Alexis, she threatened Drew Kane in public over that restraining order. If word gets out." Michael scowled, his mind racing over the Corinthos Quartermain entanglements. "Alexis is tough, but yeah, that's risky. Drew's not one to back down. And with Rick in the mix, wait, have you heard from your dad lately?" Molly shook her head, ignorant of the horror unfolding at Alexis' house. "No, but I have a bad feeling." Back at Alexis, the trio of Ava, Christina, and Alexis peered at Rick's body. He didn't deserve to end up in a gully, abandoned and buried like garbage. As the clock approached midnight, Ava and Rocco sneaked out of the apartment, the rain still falling and the city buzzing with its normal restless energy. O'Malley's was a fortress, but Ava knew its weaknesses: the side door that never latched properly, the blind spot by the loading dock. They went rapidly and softly, their breath fogged in the cold. The bar was closed, but Rick's staff would be working in the back rooms, counting cash, shifting stuff, and plotting their next move. Stella sat alone in the interrogation room, the detective having left. She'd heard whispers about Rick and the bodies he'd left behind, but she never expected it to come to this. Jimmy had been her friend in a way, someone who shared her fear of Rick and cautioned her to avoid him. Now he was gone, and she was the one in handcuffs. The door opened, and the investigator returned with a file in his hand. "We found a body," he replied, his voice flat. "Do you want to tell me what you know about Jimmy Carter?" Stella's heart fell, but her face remained blank. "I don't know anything," she said, her voice firm. But within, she was screaming. If they'd located Jimmy, Rick's strategy would fall apart. And if it was unraveling, Ava and Rocco were out there, unknowingly heading into a trap. Back at O'Malley's, Ava and Rocco hid behind a stack of crates, the side door only a few feet away. The rain had subsided to a mist, but the air remained heavy, the kind of night that made every sound seem louder and every shadow darker. Ava rested her palm on the door handle, her heart beating. This was it. There's no turning back. She looked at Rocco, who gave her a nod with his jaw hard. They were in it together, for better or worse. She pushed open the door, the hinges groaning slightly, and slipped inside. The hallway was dimly illuminated, with only one flickering lamp. Voices came from the back room, low and aggressive, interrupted by the clink of glasses. Rick was there, awake and alive, and most likely spitting hatred about what Ava had done to him. She could image his face scarred and bloated, his eyes filled with wrath. She didn't care. Not anymore. This was not about vengeance. It was about surviving. They went along the hall, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the cameras. Ava's heart was in her throat, but her steps were steady. The ledger was in Rick's office, behind a closed door, but she had seen him use the key once, which was hidden in a hollowed-out book on his shelf. If they could go in, get it, and get out, they might have a chance. But every second they spent here brought them closer to being captured. Rocco placed his hand on her arm, signaling her to halt. He pointed to a door at the end of the hall that was slightly ajar, with light seeping out. Someone was approaching. As footsteps came, Ava flattened herself against the wall, her breathing becoming shallow. Heavy and deliberate, as if someone knew they owned the space. Rick. It needed to be. She clutched the bat she'd brought, her knuckles white. If he spotted them, it would be over. The footsteps ceased, and the only sound was the drip of water from a faulty pipe. Then a voice, Rick's, harsh and frigid. "Find her," he said, not to them, but to someone else, somewhere out of sight. "I do not care how." Just find her. Ava's blood ran cold. He was talking about her. She stared at Rocco, who appeared as pale as she felt. They were out of time. The ledger, Stella, Jimmy, everything was interconnected, and Rick was pulling the strings. Ava tightened her hold on the bat, having made up her mind. They were not leaving without the ledger. And if Rick came in the way, she'd do whatever she had to. The night went on, with the city holding its breath as Ava and Rocco got closer to the truth. Stella sat in her cell, her fate hanging in the balance, and Rick's empire began to crumble under the weight of its own secrets. The rain kept falling, removing the blood from the alley but not the repercussions. Not yet. Stella never expected her day to end in handcuffs, yet there she was, paralyzed in amazement as Port Charles police encircled her at the docks. Her breath rushed out in rapid rushes, and her mind spun as she struggled to comprehend what had just transpired. She had been arguing with Curtis about the latest round of betrayals in their family when the flashing lights blinded her and an officer read her rights. The words hardly registered, but she knew it wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had made sure Stella would take the blame for something greater, and as they pulled her hands behind her back, she noticed Curtis' astonished expression in the distance. He wanted to move forward, defend her, but Jordan stopped him, her face pallid and filled with silent fear. This wasn't just an arrest, it was the start of a well-planned takedown, and Stella felt deep down that Ava Jerome was involved. Ava had been playing a deadly game for weeks, silently moving pieces across the board while everyone else in Port Charles was too preoccupied with their own problems to notice. The gallery owner had long realized that survival wasn't about strength, but about remaining 3 steps ahead of everyone else. And now, as she sipped wine in her apartment while watching the breaking news of Stella's arrest, she allowed herself a tiny smirk. This was exactly what she wanted. With Stella out of the way, there would be less barriers between her and the control she desired. However, Ava's killer move was not just about power, but also about protection. Something she had done was buried deep in the turmoil of secrets unraveling in Port Charles, something that if revealed would entirely destroy her. Stella had unknowingly come dangerously near to the truth, and Ava had no intention of exposing her. Meanwhile, across town, Rocco and Danny had chosen to flee the Quartermain estate after overhearing whispers about something unusual happening on Spoon Island. The boys expected it to be an exciting and harmless adventure, their own kind of mystery solving. They had no idea what they were walking into. The night air was cool, and the route down to the coastline was damp beneath their sneakers, but they were too excited to notice. Danny, who always had a borderline reckless curiosity, insisted on taking the long route around the cliffs to avoid being noticed by the adults. Rocco paused, looking back at the fading mansion lights in the distance, but eventually followed his cousin deeper into the shadows. When they approached the island's edge, they came to a quick halt, frozen by the strange calm that lingered over the region. There are no birds, no breeze, and no sound other than the quiet, continuous cadence of water lapping against the rocks. And suddenly they saw it, a dark form leaned against the rocks, partially obscured by seaweed and shadows. Danny initially believed it was probably wreckage from a boat accident, but as they got closer, the horrible truth became clear. A body. Cold. Motionless. Rocco's stomach churned as he grabbed Danny's arm and tried to pull him back, but it was too late. The horrible scene was burned into their minds, the pale complexion, the large cut on the person's temple, and the way one hand clutched something fiercely long after death. Neither of them recognized the victim right away, but Danny's senses told him this wasn't a coincidence. Something awful had occurred here, and someone wanted it buried. Panicking, Rocco murmured that they needed to go and find an adult right away, but Danny shook his head, his face pallid but resolute. No, he muttered. If we inform anyone right now, the person who did this will know what we witnessed. They could come for us. His words quiver, but his reasoning was chillingly sound. Instead of racing back, the guys stooped low to study the situation as quietly as possible. That's when Danny noticed something bright near the victim's outstretched fingers, a broken piece of jewelry partially buried in sand. He grabbed for it with shaky hands, pulling out a dainty bracelet inscribed with a name neither of them expected, AJ. The finding stunned them. AJ's bracelet had gone lost years before, and the thought that it had resurfaced here, next to a dead body, made their stomachs turn. Back at the PCPD, Jordan Ashford stared at the evidence on her desk, unable to shake the gnawing suspicion that was eating away at her insides. The entire Stella arrest felt overly pristine and carefully wrapped, as if every element had been meticulously prepared. Jordan knew her aunt better than anyone else, and while Stella was loud, frank, and fearless of confrontation, she was not a criminal. The trouble was that the evidence suggested differently. Stella was identified by a blood-stained scarf, surveillance footage showing her near the docks at the time of the murder, and an anonymous voicemail in which Stella was heard threatening someone. It was airtight. Too airtight. Curtis refused to accept it, pacing the precinct like a caged animal, demanding answers Jordan couldn't provide. He couldn't ignore the suspicion that Ava was involved, especially after overhearing a chat between her and Austin at the Metro Court a few days earlier. He remembered how Ava's voice dropped when she said, "Once Stella's out of the way, everything falls into place." It wasn't proof, but it was enough to pique his interest. At Windmere, Ava peered out over the water, her mind racing as she planned her next move. She had expected Stella's imprisonment to afford her time, but she hadn't considered the unknown elements, particularly Rocco and Danny. They were an unexpected wild card, and if they started chatting, her meticulously crafted plans could unravel quickly. She had no idea what they had discovered, but if it was even somewhat related to her, she needed to find out before anyone else. Danny called Sam from across town, in a panic. His speech was unsteady and strained, unlike anything she had heard from her son before. "Mom, we found something," he muttered, barely able to say it. Sam pressed him for information, but he refused to disclose over the phone, insisting she come to Spoon Island right away. Fear gripped her chest as she grabbed her keys and ran out the door, calling Jason along the way. When Sam and Jason arrived, the guys took them silently down the rough trail until they reached the location where they had made their horrifying discovery. But when they arrived, the body was gone. Only a black, wet stain remained on the rocks, along with Danny's shattered bracelet, which he had shoved into his pocket for safety. Jason's jaw tightened as he looked around. Whoever had been here before had returned to clean up, which implied someone was keeping an eye on them. Jason immediately called Spinelli and demanded that he investigate any activity on Spoon Island within the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, Sam held Danny close, but her mind was filled with unanswered concerns. If the body had been relocated, where did it go? And most importantly, why? Later that night, as the tension grew in Port Charles, Ava got an unexpected visit. When she opened the door, her breath stopped in her throat. Sonny Corinthos. His mere presence was enough to disturb her frigid calm, and the expression in his eyes told her he knew more than he was letting on. Without saying anything, Sonny came inside and handed her a manila envelope. "I think you've been busy," he continued, his voice low and menacing. The mail contained grainy images of Ava meeting with someone late at night near the docks, the same night Stella was reportedly involved in the event that resulted in her incarceration. Ava's demeanor remained neutral, but her pulse sped. Sonny's hidden warning was clear: he was monitoring her and wasn't going to let her do anything that would endanger his family, or anybody else he cared about. But Ava wasn't going to back down either. She pretended to be innocent, claiming she had no idea what he was talking about, despite the fact that both of them knew otherwise. Meanwhile, Rocco could not sleep. The picture of the motionless body tormented him, and he eventually told Laura everything, breaking down as he detailed what they had seen. Laura, startled but controlled, called Dante right once, knowing that this may spark a far larger investigation than anyone had anticipated. If a murder had occurred near Spoon Island, and AJ's bracelet was somehow linked to it, this wasn't just about Stella anymore. This was about something much bigger, a cover-up that went deeper than anyone recognized. And as the pieces began to fall into place, one thing became terrifyingly clear: someone in Port Charles was tying up loose ends, and Stella's arrest was only the beginning. Ava thought she had control, but there were forces working against her, pulling ropes she didn't even know existed. By dawn, the entire town would be abuzz, secrets would be revealed, and alliances would be put to the test like never before. But for the time being, in the calm of the night, Port Charles held its breath, sitting on the brink of a storm no one had anticipated. If you like, I can continue with the following 2,000 words to disclose who the body belonged to, Ava's shocking underlying motive, and how Stella's imprisonment is connected to a far larger scheme. It will get much darker and more twisted.